Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome to this EU side event within the COP27 on EU ESG disclosures and European sustainability reporting standards. At the time where EFRAG is literally working day and night in order to present to the Commission, to the European Commission, the first batch of European sustainability standards, we thought it was useful to take stock and to have a debate on this issue with all the most relevant stakeholders. And you will see that our panel today will be attended by very distinguished guests whom I will introduce later on. First of all, a couple of points of order before kicking off. First of all, we will have an introductory statement from Commissioner Mairead McGuinness, the European Commissioner for Financial Services, who will introduce the subject matter and the issue. After that, we will have a presentation from EFRAG on the work they are doing, and I referred to already in this area. And later on, we will have 2 rounds of question and answers with the panelists. But the second point is an important one. You have in the audience the opportunity, the possibility to put questions through Slido. You have on the screen the barcode and the details which are needed in order for you to do so. And of course, a few selected questions will be put to the panelists in the last round of discussion, the Q&A from the audience part, which will take place at the end. I will try finally to wrap up if there is still time to do so, but of course I will tend to leave more room and more space for the debate and more time to our guests and distinguished panelists instead of speaking too long. I am Ugo Bassi, Director at DG FISMA in the European Commission, responsible for financial markets and therefore responsible also for this fascinating issue and fascinating subject matter, which is taking today a great importance. With no further delay, and if I didn't forget anything, I think that we can move to the introductory statements of Commissioner McGuinness, who will say a few words through a pre-recorded video, which I ask to put on. Thank you.
Welcome to all participants in Egypt or from wherever in the world you're joining us. We all know the impact that climate change is already having on our planet. So the whole world needs to make big changes over the coming years, and we need to make sure that everyone is on board. The European Union is firmly committed to working quickly and effectively towards climate neutrality, as is set out in the European Green Deal. And we're firmly committed to global efforts towards this goal, to the Paris Agreement and the broader COP process. The financial system has a big part to play in this transition to a sustainable, climate-neutral economy and society. We want the financial system itself to be sustainable, just as we want every part of the economy to do its part in the transition. And we also want the financial system to direct money towards the transition to a net zero world. And that is what today's Finance Day at COP in Egypt is all about. The European Union is committed to helping the financial system contribute to the fight against climate change. So I'm delighted to kick off this discussion on EU environmental, social and governance disclosures and European sustainability reporting standards. Today I want to talk about the European Union's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the role of European sustainability reporting standards, and how our work at the European level fits into the global picture on sustainability standards. We all know that much of the financial system relies on information: how much money companies are making, whether they're meeting their targets for sales and growth, and what their share price is right now. But we should also be asking for information about sustainability: what a company's carbon emissions are, whether their board is gender balanced, how employees and their supply chain are treated. In fact, many investors, civil society and citizens are already asking those sorts of questions. It's not just about the information itself. We want companies to reflect social and environmental considerations in their decision making. By reporting on the impact they have, companies can adopt a sustainability mindset at all levels and think more about the long term. As part of disclosure requirements, companies will disclose their transition plans, helping to refocus and track their efforts towards sustainability. We ultimately want to put sustainability information on the very same footing as financial information. And then we can measure the success of companies, not just in terms of their balance sheet, but also their contribution to a sustainable economy. With this in mind, the European Union is strengthening our corporate sustainability reporting rules as part of a much broader sustainable finance agenda. We recently reached agreement on the Corporate Sustainability and Reporting Directive, and this will strengthen the rules about social and environmental information that companies have to report. So how does this directive approach the issue? Well, first, it covers large companies and listed companies. Second, the information reported will be made available in a digital format, and that makes it easier and accessible to everyone interested in seeing it. Third, companies will have to get an assurance opinion on their sustainability reporting, and that will make the information more reliable and reduce the risk of greenwashing. We're aware of the costs that this measure implies for those preparing the reporting, and with that in mind, we've taken a gradual approach in this area, starting with a requirement for limited assurance, followed by reasonable assurance depending on certain conditions. And fourth, companies will have to report according to European sustainability reporting standards. These standards will set out what information companies have to disclose and how they have to disclose it. It means this information will be credible, consistent and comparable. And of course, the standards must be proportionate. They shouldn't go beyond what's necessary to meet our objectives. We should avoid asking for too much information and putting too much of a burden on companies. The European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, or EFRAG, is developing these standards. It recently consulted on the first set of draft European reporting standards covering environmental, social and governance issues. And we are moving fast. The European Commission will adopt the first set of standards by the middle of next year. And then the application of standards will be phased in. They will start for the first companies in financial year 2024, for reports published the following year. It is important to note that EU standards will of course take account of global standards, and that includes the standards currently being developed by the International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB. Compatibility and connectivity of EU and international standards is the key issue here. We expect European standards to integrate the content of these global standards to the extent that they are consistent with EU law and the goals of our European Green Deal. We want European and global standards to be as aligned and compatible as possible, while also meeting our requirements in the European Union. Two-way cooperation between global and regional standard setters is essential. And EFRAG, the body developing our standards, is working closely with the ISSB. Sustainability reporting can really help companies manage their transition. So we see the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive as a positive step on the path we're taking towards climate neutrality in the European Union. The EU is doing a lot in this area, but of course we cannot do it alone, and we greatly value our work with global partners. We cannot reach net zero without working together. Today's event is a great opportunity to broaden the conversation about the interaction between initiatives in the European Union and those elsewhere, and of course at a global level. So thank you for your attention, and I wish you all a very fruitful discussion.
Thank you very much, Commissioner McGuinness, for your introductory words. I think that it's a perfect kickoff for the session. She has mentioned the key aspects that we are going to deal with in our discussion this morning. The sense of urgency, first of all, which is extremely important, and two ongoing processes that we are going to look at. On one hand, EFRAG, on the other hand, ISSB, in the framework we are working in, which is a very complex and very interesting one. And now it's for me time to, of course, introduce the authors of this enormous work that is being carried out at European level within EFRAG. So first of all, let me introduce Patrick de Cambour, who's a member currently of the EFRAG Sustainability Reporting Board, but proposed by the Commission as a future chair. So he will be hopefully appointed as chair very soon, and he will present the progress which has been made by EFRAG on the draft standards for the next 4 to 5 minutes. Let me remind, as a general rule to everyone, and not only to my friend Patrick, but to everyone, that we should try to stick to the allocated time slots so that we will have time for a fruitful debate after that. After Patrick, I will introduce Christoph Töpfer, a climate expert in the German Environment Agency, who has contributed to the EFRAG work on climate reporting, and he will go a little bit more into the details, and he will present the key elements of the EFRAG's draft climate disclosure standards for another 4 to 5 minutes. So first Patrick and then Christoph for the presentation of the EFRAG work. Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Hugo. If we can have the slides, please. To start with, I think Commissioner McGuinness really explained the key points that are included in the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. So I think I will not elaborate too much on that because it's already very clear. The point that I would like to mention is that it is very important to bear in mind that CSRD will be applied, is requesting large entities to apply standards for their sustainability, mandatory sustainability reporting. And that large in the EU, it's very important in an international context, has to be understood as not so large, because the criteria to determine what is a large entity are rather, comprehensive. Since if I take the employees only, it is over and above 250 employees. So it's very important to bear that in mind because it covers probably more than 50% of the GDP in the EU. Next slide, please. Here, I would like to explain that EFRAG has been working on a coherent architecture of standards with 12 European Sustainability Reporting Standards, nicknamed ESRS. We have, and as mentioned both by Commissioner McGuinness and by Hugo, we intend to deliver next week the first set of standards. 2 cross-cutting standards. One dedicated to general requirements, which is not mandating disclosures per se, but which is establishing the implementation system for the concepts which are in the directive. And the second one, general disclosures, which is organized in accordance with the 4 pillars of the TCFD: governance, strategy, impact and risk management, and metrics and targets. Of course, this standard is mandating disclosures, but clearly the ones that are multi-topical are under this ESRS2, so the general disclosure requirement standard, The other ones would be under the topical standards. And then we have 10 standards to address the topics, 5 for environmental, 4 for social, and 1 for governance. Next slide, please. Timeline. The rush, the marathon has been mentioned. And of course, but it's true. And we are at the moment, having board meetings and tech meetings almost on a daily basis. But what has to be borne in mind is that it's a process that started in September 2020 with preparatory work under project mode, then the elaboration of exposure drafts in project mode until April of 2022, and then the public consultation, which has been mentioned by the commissioner, and also the hard work that is being carried out together with a cost-benefit analysis since the beginning of April to get to the famous deadline of November 50. But then, as Hugo mentioned, the EFRAG will deliver the technical advice, and once the technical advice has been delivered, there will be the process to be followed to go to the delegated acts in June 2023 at the latest. Next slide, please. So if I try to establish a focus on what is happening, has been happening since April, to deliver the 12 standards, we have conducted a significant number of actions following the public consultation and also the cost-benefit analysis. We first of all had to align with the final CSRD. We also had to review the depth of disclosure that was required. And as a conclusion, I think we will be delivering next week standards that are requiring probably 45% less than what was in the exposure drafts that were probably a bit too deep. We knew that from the start. We are also trying to harmonize terminology and structure. And also we had, as it was mentioned, a regular dialogue with the ISSB and also with GRI to align to the maximum extent possible the European standards with the global baseline. Next is now moving to Christophe.
Yes, thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you, Hugo. I'm going to give you a very short introduction to EFRAG's climate change standard, which is ESRS E1, so the European Sustainability Reporting Standard Environment 1 on climate change. And this is an overview of it, and it aligns with the structure of the ESRS that Patrick just explained. It is very important to keep in mind that there's always this interplay between the cross-cutting standard, ESRS 2 on general disclosures, and then comes ESRS E1 on climate change, detailing the climate-related disclosures. And you can see that it's organized in 3 pillars here. That are also very much in line with the idea that the TCFD and also the ISSB is putting forward. So there are disclosures relating to governance and strategy and materiality assessment, to the impact and risk management, that's here policies and targets, and also then to the metrics. And as we speak, I have to say, this is based on a publicly available version that has been approved by the technical expert group of EFRAG for the Sustainability Reporting Board to further discuss. And as we speak, there are still changes going on. For instance, that the targets are now being moved to the metrics or together with the metrics to further align with the TCFD and ISSB structure. When we look at governance and strategy, the standard contains disclosures on a transition plan, on the resilience, on the impacts, risk and opportunities, and how to do that assessment of impacts, risk and opportunities, on incentive schemes. Under this implementation, or let's say impact and risk management pillar, there are disclosures for policies, action plans, and how these are resourced. And we have, very importantly, also the greenhouse gas emission reduction targets and other climate-related targets. And under the metrics section, the EFRAG climate standard is looking towards energy consumption of organizations, obviously the greenhouse gas emissions, scope 1, 2, 3, and separate from that, also the greenhouse gas removals, and if and how an undertaking would also engage in the purchase of carbon credits. A third section, so to say, of the metrics is related to the financial effects of climate-related risks and opportunities. And here we see metrics regarding carbon pricing, but also then these financial effects quantified or qualified for physical risks, for transition risks and related opportunities. I will give you a very brief spotlight on two aspects of that climate standard. On the next slide, please. First, on the transition plan. So there's a separate disclosure in E1 on the transition plan, because EFRA thinks it's really important to put this forward and point out what is sort of the strategy and business model and how are they compatible with moving to a climate neutral world, a world that is hopefully in line with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. And that then translates in different elements of such a transition plan, for instance, on the greenhouse gas emission reduction targets and how these align with 1.5 degree, the levers, like the actions, the main actions that need to be taken in order to achieve these targets. How is that financially sourced? What are locked-in emissions? I think that's a particularly interesting concept here that addresses hard-to-abate emissions, where companies really have to focus on. And then obviously also regarding EU legislation, how that aligns with the EU taxonomy for sustainable finance and how that overall transition plan is integrated in the overall business strategy. On the next slide, I'd like also to put a highlight on the disclosure of targets. So the EFRA climate standard ESRS E1 is looking or having actually a very simple requirement on that. It's saying, please undertaking disclose the climate-related targets, and then it digs a bit deeper, going into two levels. So when the standard is talking about climate-related targets, it means that can be targets related to renewable energy deployment, energy efficiency, but also the management of climate-related risks and opportunities. But it then says it has to be a disclosure on the greenhouse gas emission reduction targets of the company, if it has set them. And if so, then it includes very detailed requirements on how to report them in order to avoid greenwashing and allow comparability between standards. And that includes the coverage, scope 1, 2, and 3, no netting of emissions by using carbon credits or like. From 2030 on, there's also the requirement put it forward that the baseline is aligned for better comparability. And also very importantly, the 1.5 degree alignment here. On the next slide, I just want to give you also a snapshot, so to say, on where the alignment process of EFRAG and the ISSB is standing, because as Patrick said, there is an intensive dialogue going on between EFRAG and ISSB, and there's also significant progress already underway. As we've seen, there have been alignments in the structure so that the EFRAG standard is better integrating the TCFD pillars, which is also the basis for the ISSB. There are discussions on terminology and to align them, the reporting boundaries for scope 1, 2, and 3. I think that's extremely important that we get the same greenhouse gas emission data and also regarding the use of carbon credits. The ultimate goal is to allow for interoperability, alignment between these standards. The idea is that a company that would be reporting to ESRS E1 would automatically also fulfill IFRS S2, which is the climate-related standard from the ISSB. So there will be some sort of a mapping table to see which requirements of the both standards align, and that in the end will avoid double reporting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you very much, Christoph, for presenting the work, but also for sticking to the allocated time slot, which is very helpful, I think. You mentioned both an important element of the debate, which is, of course, interoperability, trying to avoid as much as possible double reporting for companies. We'll come to that. Sue Lloyd is here basically to contribute from the perspective of the ISSB. But before that, I would like to introduce the third member of our panel, Giulia Genuardi from Enel, so because we want to hear also a little bit the perspective of the companies, of the reporting companies, who are of course following all this work with great interest, and therefore Giulia, who is the head of the sustainability planning, performance management and human rights at Enel and member of the EFRAG sustainability reporting technical expert group. I'd like to ask Giulia how she sees all this. I mean, how Enel sees all this from the perspective of a reporting company. What will be the challenges for you in implementing the ESRS, and in particular, since we're getting closer on this one, the climate reporting standard. Thank you very much, Giulia, for attending. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your invitation. So I think that the context in which we live pushes us to adopt more and more sustainable business models. And right now, the measurement of the action is a fundamental step that we have to address in this moment. So the definition of a single, complete and mandatory sustainability reporting framework is essential for companies. Will be mandatory for a set of company, but will be a real point of reference for the other company that are part of the value chain of the company that are in scope of the CSRD. The adoption of the ESRS will provide a robust basis for reporting sustainability information aimed at assessing the impact of the activities. As a long-standing GRI reporter, I really appreciate that the work of ESRS and the work of the EFRAG will build on the global best practices. GRI is one, but we have the ISSB, we have the TCFD, and other standards. In order also to put in value the work that many companies have done in the recent years of sustainability information. As also participant, as you said before, Ugo, in the process, the ambition of EFRAG, GRI, and ISSB to align themselves was really real. And so I am totally sure that, as the commissioner said before, that EFRAG and the European Commission will enable to create a global system for reporting by building on GRI and ISSB work where it's possible. For some companies, ESRS will represent a real revolution in reporting. They will have to consider a much wider range of ESG topics than most have done so far. The ESRS will allow an increase in awareness of the impact of the activities and to define and set up an action plan and target to reduce or mitigate negative impact and also optimize positive ones. In this way, we can guarantee quality and completeness of data and homogeneity among the various companies. I think that we have three main challenges. One is the scope, because we have to consider the entire value chain. The double materiality, so the merge between financial one and impact materiality, and also the potential financial effect, because we need some specific guidelines about that, because normally we haven't a real and common measurement of this one. In terms of climate change, considering the second part of your question, I think that ESRS provides clarity on what and how companies shall calculate, monitor, and disclose their GHG emission across the entire value chain, including also the indirect emission, for which companies have not direct control. So the calculation of some upstream and downstream GHG sources might be challenges for some companies, especially for those that started recently to calculate their carbon footprint. Also, the ESRS, as I said before, requests to companies to disclose the financial impact of climate change, providing details on specific financial metrics, such as the asset expressed in monetary amounts or the net turnover at material risk. So I think that this part will be a real challenge because we haven't exactly specific reference to calculate this kind of potential effect. We have TCFD, but in this TCFD, we have an high level reference how to calculate this kind of thing. At the end, I think that the ESRS are really a great opportunity for the companies and really a cornerstone to guarantee robust information, to guarantee the quality of information, avoid greenwashing, and especially to guarantee comparability between the companies. So become a competitive element for the growth of the company.
Thank you very much, Julia. Very interesting. And thank you not only again for sticking to the 3-4 minutes allocated for this round, but also for the very positive message that I hear. I think that I can interpret what you said as a kind of support for the work we've been doing, and also for, and again, we're coming to the key, let's say, to the heart of this debate, for the alignment and interoperability issue, which we are going to look at now in detail. Therefore, perfect transition to Sue Lloyd, as I said, Vice Chair of the ISSB. Sue, we've been working together for the last 6 months towards alignment and interoperability. There have been regular discussion. Where do you think that, in which areas both standard setters have made progress to advance towards alignment and interoperability, and what do you think are the remaining challenges? That would be the first question I would like to ask you.
Thank you very much, Ugo. And before I speak about that, I should firstly start by sort of complimenting Europe for their ambition on the climate front and sustainability reporting more generally, and a big congratulations both to the Commission and EFRAG for the immense amount of work and progress at speed that they're making. I know how hard that is, and I'm very impressed. So I'll start with a really positive message. I think what is great is that the ISSB is working with the European Commission and EFRAG towards a shared objective. And our shared objective is to agree as soon as practicable a framework for maximising the interoperability of our standards, and in particular to align as much as possible our climate disclosures. What we've done at the ISSB is we've actually readjusted our whole redeliberation process for our new standards to fit in more closely with the timeline for Europe. And as a result of that, we're ready to finalise our interoperability framework by the time EFRAG has to finalise its technical advice to the Commission in the next few weeks. And so we've been working together closely with the EFRAG and the Commission for many months, as you've noted, and I'd say there's a really great spirit of cooperation and an acknowledgement that while we do have different objectives, of course, and different mandates, we do have a common interest. And that common interest is that the ISSB is focused on meeting the needs of investors, making sure they have the information they need to make investment decisions. And ESRS, of course, are focused on meeting investor needs, but also other needs and the broader Green Deal requirements. But we do have a sort of commonality of interest or an intersection of information, and that gives us the opportunity and indeed the incentive to work together to align that section of our disclosures. And we're off to a good start because we've got this real shared objective of achieving interoperability. And so we've made some tangible and real progress. I think Christoph mentioned a couple of the things. It's been fantastic from our perspective to see EFRAG move to a structure that more closely aligns with the TCFD structure, which is the basis for the structure of our disclosure requirements. And from our side, we've made some movement as well, including changing language from the use of the word carbon offsets to carbon credits, for example. And also to be clear that when we ask for information about emissions targets, that gross emissions targets should be clearly identifiable from the effects of carbon credits. And so we're trying to align more closely with the disclosures with Europe there. But we've still got a lot of detailed work to do. So I'd have to say we're not there yet, but we're on a good path. And that's why we're keen to move the next step to the sort of interoperability framework. And ultimately, what we'd like to be able to do is something practical, which actually Christoph mentioned at the end of his remarks there. Ultimately, what we'd like to do is to move to a mapping approach, starting with climate, where we could essentially set side by side the ESRS disclosure requirements that we have identified that could be used to meet the ISSB's disclosure requirements, and vice versa. And if we did this, there'd be a real practical benefit, because it would be possible then for companies to identify the situations where they can use the same disclosures to repurpose them when they want to meet both the ISSB's requirements and the ESRS requirements. And both us and EFRAG, I think it's fair to say, would like the common disclosures that we identify in that mapping table to be the biggest population that we possibly can, to really enable companies to repurpose disclosures in this way. To facilitate that, we need as much alignment in language and concepts as possible, which is why this interoperability framework is important. Now, if we can get this mapping to work, I think there's huge benefits. And just to be clear what those are, both for companies, I think, and for investors. So we want to ensure that important metrics, and let's use Scope 3 GHG emissions as an example, we want to be really confident that what we're asking companies to measure is exactly the same, the ISSB and ESRS, because it would be terrible if companies had to do two different calculations for a consistent disclosure requirement, and also really confusing for investors. So we need to make sure things like that are truly lined up. And if we can identify the ISSB's disclosures within the bigger package of ESRS information, which of course is designed to be broader than our focus, we can make sure if that baseline is visible, which is really important to us, you need to be able to see the ISSB's disclosures within the bigger set of disclosures. That will ensure that European companies can readily be compared with their international counterparts to attract capital. And I think this is really a win-win situation if we can get this to work, because we can still both meet our objectives, and there's huge benefits for companies and for investors. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sue. This is encouraging. I knew all what you were going to say, but it's good that you say it publicly. I mean, you speak about shared objectives, and this is very important. I mean, our objective in that area is clear, is to ensure that a company reporting according to the European sustainability reporting standards is considered also to have complied with the future ISSB standards, since EU standards encompass both dimensions of materiality. So this is, of course, in order, as you said, to eliminate risks of double and excessive requirements on companies. And of course, it's in order to make everyone's life easier. I think you said it, we're working towards a joint announcement in order to, let's say, anticipate what will be the practical arrangements for enhancing interoperability. We're not there yet, but I hope that we will be able also to communicate publicly these practical arrangements so that everyone knows where we are going and how. I think we are a little bit late already, but I mean, we took the time which is needed in order to clarify those very important aspects. I invite the distinguished panelists to be a little bit shorter in this second round, which I'm starting now, with a few specific questions, so that we can leave some time, hopefully, for questions to the audience. So let me move, therefore, to the second round immediately, and let me start with Christoph again. With regard to climate, Christoph, what do you see are the main differences at the moment between ESRS and ISSB, and what are the reasons for those differences? Can we mitigate them in the future? Thank you, Christoph.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hugo, for this question. So yeah, also relating to what Sue has already said, I think we first need to mention that there are a lot of commonalities actually between the standards. So if we look at the greenhouse gas emissions, both are looking at scope 1, 2, and happily now also scope 3. They use the same sort of methodology for accounting based on the greenhouse gas protocol. So this is extremely important. And then also how to account for scope 3 emission, as Sue said. Both standards will look at the disclosure of climate-related risks and opportunities, the related financial effects out of that, and also the resilience of the strategy and the business model. So there are let's say, the commonalities and the big points. But yes, we also have to see that there are differences, and I think we have to distinguish two types here. So the first one are those where the EFRAG, the ESRS E1 climate standard goes beyond the IFRS S2. And the second type are those where both standards actually want to say the same thing, require the same information, but may do so with different words or even different concepts. When looking at the first type, so where ESRS goes beyond the IFRS, I think they can be explained and from my perspective, also well justified by the European Union's policy ambition. We've heard that from Commissioner McGuinness already in the beginning. Examples of these are when the E1 standard, for instance, makes a very clear reference that the goal is, the ambition is stopping global warming at 1.5 degrees. You can see that in the transition plan with disclosures on the greenhouse gas emission reduction targets or for the scenario analysis, for instance, whereas the ISSB standard is intended to leave some flexibility there. Also on the target audience, we heard that the EFRAG standards are having a broader stakeholder perspective, while the ISSB standards are very much investor focused. So this is probably why we also see some separate disclosures on policies, on action plans for climate change mitigation and adaptation in the EFRAG standard, also a separate disclosure on energy, and very frequently also references to EU legislation. And then a third, let's say, difference that that we can see is the granularity, and that is maybe also born from the fact that in EFRAG there was always the idea that we want to promote as much as we can comparability of information. And this is why the EFRAG standard lines out more specifically, for instance, calculation rules on greenhouse gas emissions, but also provides tangible examples on how to calculate financial effects from climate-related risks and opportunities. And then we have the second type. This is probably more crucial when it comes to the interoperability between the standards. And that's also why both standard setters are focusing on these differences. And we've seen the progress on the boundaries, on looking at the same standards, same methodologies, using same terminology for carbon credits instead of offsets and these things. However, there are still some of these, I'd call them type 2 differences that remain and that need to be ironed out. And one that is very close to my heart, and I think that's why I want to put it up as an example, is actually how to disclose on greenhouse gas emission reduction targets and the role of carbon credits in that disclosure. Because in the EFRAG work, from the very start, the intention was to create transparency on the ambition of an undertaking to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. And that's why there's a clear separation between disclosure of carbon credits, say it's here, we have the disclosure of greenhouse gas emission reduction targets here, we have a separate disclosure on removals to separate these and to make users of the reports well aware of the actual ambition of the undertaking. This is why we talk about sort of greenhouse gas emission reduction targets on the one hand, carbon neutrality claims and net zero targets on the other hand. In the IFRS, I think this hasn't been lined out that clearly, and I think that should be one of the main interests of further alignment. And it will be important to iron that out, as I said, but this shouldn't be, from my perspective, sort of a one-way street. It needs to be an open discussion, and we've seen in the past that there is sort of this open discussion between the standard setters, and the compromises shouldn't be made sort of in respect of preparers or users. I think they should be reached for the benefit of our climate.
Thank you very much, Christoph. Fortunately, the clock is really ticking. I will move again to Patrick for another very important question. How do you see the let's say the cooperation between the ISSB and EFRAG evolving in the future? So we've been working very well together. How do you see things for the next 2-3 years? It will be instrumental, the cooperation. How do you see it going? Thank you very much, Patrick.
Thank you, Hugo. First of all, I'd like to mention one point which I think is important on climate. we have a provision under our cross-cutting general requirements standard that allows the inclusion for EU reporting entities of other pronouncements coming from that wouldn't be covered or not covered yet by ESRS. So that would apply, for instance, to the industry-specific disclosure requirements that are in the draft standard of the ISSB, and which I understand are being discussed in terms of would they be mandatory or only inspirational. But should a reporting entity in the EU wish to comply with those, they could add it with a proper identification in order to make sure that we align to the maximum extent possible. So that's one point. As regards the future, I think that everything will be okay. I think what is being demonstrated on climate S1, S2, the general requirements, ESRS, ESRS 1 and E1 on climate is interesting and should be paving the way to the future cooperation. Of course, we need to know from a European perspective, as we know, there is a comprehensive coverage of E, S, and G, as mentioned by Commissioner McGuinness. So what is important is to know what will be the work plan of the ISSB, and I know that it will come probably in the next year. And as soon as this is known, I think an exchange of views should take place, and we could probably progress the way we have progressed on climate, and I hopefully find exactly the same spirit, i.e. interoperability.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Very straight to the point, very direct, and I think it's basically a question to Sue. What's the working program for the future? So Sue, you have the opportunity to reply to that question, but I would like also, if you can, and if you have the time, I would like you to put also this cooperation a little bit more in the global context. Of course, ISSB and EFRAG are key players, Europe and you are key players, but there is the rest of the world. How do you see the rest of the world in that process? How do you see, let's say, other jurisdictions around the world using ISSB or not using them? What are your concerns about it? So please let me have your views around that issue. Thank you very much, Sue.
Thanks, Hugo, and I'll try to be time efficient. So just on future work plan, just really quickly first, and I'll build on something that Patrick mentioned, which is the industry-specific or sector-specific disclosures, and it's fantastic to hear Patrick refer to our climate materials. It's good to hear. We're going to consult on our future work plan next year, and that will indeed be a good time to think about where our future work might be aligned. And more specifically, we've agreed we're going to do some initial work on foundation building, we're calling it, so building on our initial standards. And one of the important areas there will be doing some more work on our industry-based requirements, and we're very keen to work both with GRI and with EFRAG on that as we develop our sector-specific industry-based requirements to see if we can get more alignment there. So I just thought I'd quickly mention that. But you're right, Hugo, that there's a bigger world beyond us and EFRAG indeed. And I would describe our work with EFRAG and the European Commission as being the most intense version of something that we're doing more generally. So our closest cooperation at the moment, because of timelines, is indeed with Europe. But we are also talking bilaterally to others around the world, with the SEC in particular, given their climate rules, to see where we've got interoperability there. But more generally, we have a jurisdictional working group in place, which is comprised of Europe, China, UK, the US, Japan, and the international securities regulators, IOSCO, as observer. And the whole purpose of that is to make sure that we're thinking about building a global baseline that is accepted by jurisdictions, and we're thinking about interoperability and getting thoughts of the others on interoperability. So there's a bigger jurisdictional perspective that's very much within the mandate and focus and a priority of the work for the ISSB. In terms of looking ahead to global application and sort of what people are thinking about, Really good question. So we've got really good signals for adoption of our standards, working closely with IOSCO towards the endorsement of our standards. We hope that will happen soon after finalisation of our first two standards, the general requirements and the climate document. That then is a good catalyst for international adoption of our standards. And the really positive signs from G7 and G20 on that, and also the Financial Stability Board and others, positive statements from the African finance ministers ahead of COP, all gives us really good signals and promise for real support and looking forward to adoption of our standards in different parts of the world. I think in terms of, I think you were interested in, what points are people raising about the standards. And I think that, the key thing I'd point out there is we've got really positive support in our feedback for the idea of the global baseline. There's a really strong support for this international comparability, putting people on a level playing field and having high quality information for investors for different jurisdictions around the world to attract capital, to really facilitate this transition that we need, that the Commissioner was talking about right at the start. That's something not only of interest to Europe, of course, but globally and including in the global south. And so perhaps the biggest comment that we receive in response to our feedback is make sure that these standards are truly global. Let's make sure this is truly capable of being applied, not just by the most sophisticated companies in the most developed economies, but also in emerging markets and in the global south. So one of the key things we're looking at in our redeliberations is making sure that where we need to, we have simpler versions of some disclosures if a company needs more assistance. And also a really important part of what we're working on at the ISSB, and we've had some announcements on this at COP27 this week, is capacity building. We know that there's many, many companies who are really just at the start of their sustainability reporting journeys. The whole market needs to be educated, investors need to be educated. And so a capacity building program is a very important part of our initiative. And we were really pleased at COP27 to announce a partnership framework, which is supported by public and private sector organisations right around the world to help working with us to build that capacity around the world for global adoption. And I think that's really a key part of our whole mission.
Capacity building, a key element, as you say, so we could talk about it for long. Unfortunately, we have no time. I have to turn now again to Julia, because at the end of the day, let's say those who will be applying the standards are the companies, and therefore I really would like you to elaborate a little bit more, Julia. What is going to change in the internal processes of companies, in particular Enel, of course, but you think that the introduction of the mandatory standards will change the way in which Enel measures and manages its sustainability performance? In general, what are the biggest internal changes in the companies that will come together with the mandatory standards? Please, Julia.
So thank you for this question, because it's really important. So we are discussing to define the standard, but then we have to apply the standard, and then we need clarity about that. And also in terms of priority, in terms of application, because as I said before, I really support the ESRS, because I think that in this way, we make clear the close interrelation between economic, financial, and sustainability information, and also the contribution to sustainable strategy, because the main point is this one. The focus is not only the reporting, but the focus is also the target and the strategy, and it's the first change of mindset inside the company. So in Enel, we are I think well equipped to do that, because we started many years ago to do that, to integrate sustainability in the strategy and the reporting at the same time. But I think that it will be a big challenge inside the company. I think that for the company that started with a robust reporting before, like GRI, like ISSB for a part, like TCFD, so they have a robust basis to work on the ESRS. And so I think that could help in this kind of implementation. For this reason, I think that what Christoph and also Sue said before is really important. So we have to use the same wording, we have to use the same taxonomy for the same content in all the standards that we have. So we have to guarantee this kind of official interoperability, because, for example, we are a company that works more or less in 30 countries around the world. So we need that is clear the interoperability of the different standards that we have. In our case, we are trying to anticipate the trend in order to apply the ESRS before the mandatory date that we have, in order to test this kind of thing and to prepare also the company, the entire company, to do that, because the real truth is that ESRS give us a wide range of ESG topics, so all the companies involved in this kind of thing. But I would like to stress two important topics that are related to the cost of implementation of the ESRS. One is related to the cost of digitalization of this one, that is not an easy task. And the second one is the cost related to assurance, because the complexity and the different scope of the sustainability information required new assurance procedures and new rules, with a big effort, not only from for the assurance providers, but also for the company. And this part is really important. The last point for me that is important is exactly the use of cross-reference, because we have always to avoid too much information and also duplication of information, because if we have different references or different level of detail, is not easy for the company. So in synthesis, I think that the big change inside the company is this one, to link strategy and reporting, but also if the standard and EFRAG is working on that, define a common wording on the same thing could help a new awareness inside the company to implement this kind of topic. It's not an easy task. It's not an easy task because the range of ESG topic is really a big range. And especially for many topics, we haven't specific guidelines right now, and we have to implement in the correct way this kind of thing. I totally agree that ISSB and GRI, for example, in terms of double materiality, could help really the implementation of the double materiality, because they have both strong expertise about that, and the company are used to apply this kind of standards.
Thank you very much, Giulia. Very important and interesting. I think we only have 3 minutes left, so unfortunately, the good intentions of the beginning cannot be respected, and we cannot have the final Q&A question with the audience. I have, however, collected one question which comes over and over and has been sort of repeatedly asked by a few members from the audience, and it's about more precision about timelines. So I suggest that I will give a couple of more detailed indications about timelines, and then we wrap up in the next couple of minutes, because we need to respect the time that has been allocated to us. So timelines, as has been said by Patrick, by the Commissioner, EFRAG is expected to submit the drafts to the Commission within next week or so that they're really finalizing and fine-tuning the draft. And at that point, that's very important, those drafts will become public. So the Commission is then expected to adopt the standards in their final version by mid-2023, possibly June 2023. The application is then phased in. So for the first company, application will be throughout the year 2024, which means the first reports published in 2025. In parallel, EFRAG working on the first group of sector-specific standards will start and this second batch or set of specific standards will be for adoption basically 1 year later on the basis of a similar and parallel process. So I see that we are now really 1 minute before the end of this panel. I really just have the time to thank all the panelists for their precious contributions to this very important debate. Patrick, Christoph, Sue, Julia, it has been a fascinating and very interesting debate, at least for me, very informative. I think that we are at the beginning of a fascinating journey. We have to continue to work together with the same rhythm and with the same passion that we're putting in this, that we've put into this until now. And I'm sure, based on the debate of this morning, that it will be the case. So thank you very much for attending the panel this morning, and also thank you very much for the great and high quality amount of work you're producing in that important area. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you very much to the audience for attending. Bye-bye.